Thanks for joining us for our weekly discussion show. We call it Moral Side of the News. We're glad you're alongside today. I'm John Blim with the WHAS Crusade for Children. With me, as always, is our distinguished panel, Dr. Marian Taylor, South Frankfort Presbyterian Church, Rabbi Emeritus Stan Miles, Temple Shalom, Rabbi Gaylia Rooks, the Temple, Reverend Dr. Kilen Gray, Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary, and Father Joe Graffis, Archdiocese of Louisville. Our first topic, Kentucky Derby winning horse Medina Spirit failed a blood test and will be disqualified if a second test comes back positive in just a few weeks. The horse's Hall of Fame trainer, Bob Baffert, has sent mixed messages about whether it did or didn't happen. So turning to our panel on Moral Side of the News, first, this casts a bad light on horse racing, but second, from a bigger picture, what lessons can be learned from being honest?
First of all, these rules are important and they exist for a reason. And they are rules that the whole horse industry has agreed to. They serve two purposes. One is that if you mask pain, if you use drugs to mask pain, horses will be more likely to harm themselves. And then if you give them performance enhancing drugs, that also is, in addition to just flat out cheating, is also can be dangerous to the horses. So that's what's at stake. In this particular case, it was not a performance enhancing drug, but it was one with the potential to mask pain. So, just as an ethical and moral principle, I think we should all be able to agree that protecting these very fine animals is a moral principle, and it's one that the whole industry's agreed to. So then you get to the trainer, Bob Baffert, and, of course, anybody can slip up and make a mistake, although it's his job not to, and he's supposed to have all this information. But apparently he's slipped up 5 times in the last 12 months. And so, something's going on there. Either he doesn't agree with the industry standards, or because he's a very personable person, maybe he thinks he can just keep getting away with it. I once read a book entitled A Severe Mercy. It was a case in which somebody felt that God had dealt with him severely in order to wake him up. And it may be that Bob Baffert and perhaps others in his profession would benefit from really having a comeuppance. And this may be one of those cases.
This situation reminded me so much of the situation a few years ago with Rick Pitino at U of L. All of that information was being brought out, and we didn't know, did he know, didn't he know, and so on and so forth. With the horses, Marian, I agree with what you said, because these thoroughbred horses are such fragile creatures.
Because we bred them to be that fragile, those spindly legs.
Yeah. And
I think I agree with Marian that I love horse racing only because I think horses are such beautiful animals. Even if I never place a bet on them, which I do occasionally anyway, but I just like to watch them. But not just this case, but so many things over the last couple of years have really, and I've been on the backside with some that how we're not taking care of these animals very well. And, Santa Anita had all kinds of horses die. And again, as Gaylia said, we're breeding them to be very fragile legs, and they're huge animals. And a misstep here and a misstep there. I mean, we all know how fragile most of us are, and they're considerably larger than we are. So, these rules need to be in place, although it gets very confusing to me how minute they are sometimes, and then they've changed a lot of those rules. So I imagine it has to be confusing to anyone who's dealing with a bunch of horses. It's not just that. But I'm not trying to apologize for Baffert, but I do think there's a lot of confusing stuff in all of this. But the bottom line is what's best for the health of the animals, and trainers, jockeys, everybody else needs to be protective of that. Now, as far as the cheating goes, Baffert has been so successful, I don't know why he would even have to cheat as many times as he's won in so many different ways, although I guess that does raise some questions. I just think we're going to learn a lot more about this, but how do we, and of course the horse is running this weekend. So, you know, I don't know, but it's so sad for the horse racing industry.
And, you know, I mean, I think horses are magnificent creatures. If you read the Bible, King Solomon, and in Song of Songs, and, you know, that they are used as a great standard of beauty and power and just an amazing creature of God. And we do need to take care of them. That's our responsibility. And it goes beyond that, though. It has to do with following rules. And I feel that the temperament of our country of late has been, you know, the cult of the personality, people believing that they are above the rules, that, you know, well, those rules are for everyone else and don't apply to me. Now, I don't know that that's the case with Bob Baffert, and I would like to give him the benefit of the doubt. One of the medical examiners who was involved in this case said that he doesn't believe that Baffert knew anything about it because it so obviously would show up in a test. Why would he risk it? And they did it even right up to the day before the Derby. They used this ointment right up to the last minute. And so if he was trying to cheat, he wouldn't have done so in such an obvious way where he would be caught. So I like to presume the best about everyone. On the other hand, she says very rabbinically, Marian, you mentioned, what was it, 5 times in the past 1 year. However, it's been 30 times over his 4-year career that he has been accused of cheating in one manner or another, trying to get around the rules. He has not lost, his lawyer is great. I think it's a Texas lawyer, I don't know, but irrelevant. But sometimes the lawyer has been able to get him off on technicalities or because of the way the samples were drawn or the chain of possession or things like that. But it does not paint a clear and honest picture of Bob Baffert.
One of the issues that this all brings up when it comes to honesty is what it's modeled before many parts of our country, particularly young persons, persons that are in formation. And one of the things that has been interesting to me around the cult of personality that we're seeing blazed before all of us is how there are segments of our population that admire rule breakers. We have a veneration. Parts of our country, parts of our community venerates and holds in high regard people who find a way to skirt around policy, to skirt around protections. And that concerns me because we're still in light of January 6th, when now we've got legislators who are trying to describe January 6th, that it wasn't an insurrection, that it was not persons who were trying to, that the actual activity of January 6th in Washington, D.C. was orderly. And they're really trying to describe that. And it's indicative of if it's not a growing sentiment, it is a present sentiment of persons who tend to venerate and lift up persons who, in spite of agreed upon law, in spite of agreed upon rules, that there are persons in our country who holds in high regard persons who try to figure out how to skirt responsibility. I think it's debilitating to our culture and to our community when that happens. And that's something that people of goodwill need to really stand in guard against. It is just not enough to say, I didn't know. And that's what happened with the Pitino case. It's happening here in Baffert's case, that, those of us who are responsible for organizations and responsible for the actions of other people, when when things do take place, it is just not enough to just say, I didn't know that it took place.
And particularly with young people, like a lot of us, I deal with a fair amount of young people in different places. And trying to teach them about honesty is really, really difficult right now because they see television, they see and they hear parents and they hear other people saying, well, that's okay. He just did that. That's okay. But it's not right for you. And they see the double standard. And of course, it only helps make all institutions and churches as well that, incredible are lacking credibility in terms of honesty.
I just think we are in desperate need of moral exemplars in every endeavor in this country. And what we need to stay away from are these dangerous situational ethics.
Yeah. Well, I have a little bit of good news from inside the horse industry. I've learned that a new enforcement regime will be in place by July of 2022. Some legislation was worked on for 7 or 8 years, and finally in an omnibus bill at the last minute, former President Trump signed it into law. So there will be a tighter, more independent, very expert, very professional sort of regulation and enforcement regime in place within about a year and a half.
What worries me is on one of Bob Baffert's previous indiscretions, shall we say, breaking of the rules. I don't think indiscretion is strong enough. Later, I don't know, 7 or 8 years later, maybe, the rule was changed and the drug that he used became legal and acceptable. But that we don't make the rules. We are called upon to follow the rules. If the rules are not just and fair, there are procedures in place to try to change them. And I would, if I were the betting type, I would bet that even if they're thinking of making this ointment acceptable, they will not go back and say, that Medina Spirit or Bob Baffert, are now the winners of the Derby, because that was not the rule at the time. Now, that isn't to say that if there's some gross injustice being perpetrated and human lives are at stake, and you feel called to, live, thou shalt not stand idle while thy neighbor bleeds, or something, some higher ruling, that we don't need to act sometimes and speak out definitely and not wait for the courts to take their proper amount of time and change the rules. But in this case, it clearly does not fall in that category. And whether they change the acceptance of this ointment or not is irrelevant in this case, because currently it's illegal and using it is wrong. You mentioned Rick Pitino. I remember I was on Moral Side of the News the day that story broke. And I just, my bottom line, because you know how much I know about card basketball, but my statement was either he knew, in which case he's guilty, or he didn't know, in which case he's guilty, because he's the head coach and he is responsible. And that's what I would say about Bob Baffert. He did not know this was happening, in which case you can't change the rules, but I wouldn't hold it against him. But yeah, kind of, because he's the trainer. He's responsible for every drug, every oat, every morsel that goes into that horse or onto that horse. He's responsible for that.
I think another issue that we can't escape with this type of conversation is the benefit of the doubt that privilege receives. That when people break rules or skirt rules based on where you are socioeconomically, the conversation is totally different. Now, the conversation is whether Baffert should receive the benefit of the doubt. It's true that our virtue in this country is that you are innocent until proven guilty. But there's a different conversation that happens when a person is not privileged, when a person does not have economic privilege or other types of privilege, the conversation is totally different. The wonder of what did a person know? What could have been an explanation other than a person is guilty? Whereas persons who are not privileged to have that type of benefit, that conversation is not had whatsoever. It's okay. It's automatically.
I think it goes further than that, Kilen. I mean, I agree with what you're saying, especially if we talk about human beings, privilege, wealth, access, as Bob Baffert has, to the best lawyers who can, look for the loopholes, and people of lower socioeconomic background who, have to rely on a public defender. That gets us into the whole bail bond issue and all the rest of that, cash bail. But I think that it's much deeper than that. It's not just privilege. That's one problem that we're having in the country right now, and a severe problem. But another one that, I'm not that old, but I mean, it's like gotten worse and worse and worse over the generations that I have been alive, whether it's a sports star or a movie star or people of great power. It's not just affluence, although often affluence can buy you power. But, when the president of the United States feels that they are above the laws don't apply to me because I'm the leader of the free world. That is what is even more concerning to me. Fortunately, that's a smaller sliver of the injustices going on in our country. I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, but that's the category into which I feel Bob Baffert falls, because he is, the kingmaker when it comes to Kentucky Derby horses. But your point about privilege, there's no question. Money can buy your way out of many, many things, even without that power. No question.
All right, panel, we're off to a good start on our program, Moral Side of the News. We're about halfway through. I'd like to move on to our second topic. Colonial Pipeline announced Wednesday that pipeline operations have restarted after a cyber attack forced the company to take its systems offline last week. News of that attack sparked panic, with residents lining up at the pump in some regions over fears of a gas shortage. The 5,500-mile gas pipeline supplies about 45% of the fuel on the East Coast. The FBI said the attack is the work of a criminal gang known as Darkside. So now turning to our panel on Moral Side of the News. Panel, cyber attacks are real. What can we learn from this, and how secure do you feel about the safety of our systems in our country?
Let's go into the realm of the theoretical. Let's say that this Darkside group is from another country, okay? And if they are from another country, then what they perpetrated with shutting down the Colonial Pipeline is an act of war, okay? Following me so far? Good. We have an organization on the East River in New York. It's called the United Nations. I don't think it has ever lived up to its potential in over 75 years. But I think now it has the chance to, if we use the United Nations for all of the nations to get together and develop a plan that this sort of thing will not happen again to any country, and if it does happen, there are consequences.
Well, what can the consequences be if we can't even identify them, if we can't find them? The malware that hackers are using is so sophisticated, and when they ask for a ransom, it's like hospitals or electric fuel, power, whatever grids, they can't just sit around and wait. And you know how we don't ever negotiate with terrorists. I mean, these are terrorist activities. There's no question. And they're doing it for money, huge amounts of money. And I'm not sure what the United Nations could do, although it is certainly a multinational challenge, problem, crisis. And I think that we should all get together and work on it. I don't know what we can do. It's very scary. To answer your question, John, how safe do you feel? Not very.
I think Stan is right. Obviously, we need some international level, but on the other hand, I think the whole cyberspace question, and it changes every day, and new kind of things, and all that stuff is moving so fast that whatever you set in place today, 2 months from now, would be ancient history. And but the danger of renegades, hackers, to hurt anybody in the world today, in a lot of these things, is immense, and it's very concerning. Far more concerning, well, I would say the nuclear weapons, although that's definitely a problem still around with us. But it's like right now that damage can happen almost anywhere to any of us. So this is a very serious problem, and I don't even know where to begin. We need to get some software expert who can tell us about what can be done, but hopefully the powers that be in those industries can also do some self-regulation about, but how to do that, I'm not sure.
WHAS this past week has run a great series on the 11 o'clock news about a tangential issue, that of robocalls, that affects each and every one of us. And it's astounding how much people can get away with scot-free.
Well, I don't think that's threatening, although it certainly is irritating. But it can be used in a threatening way to undermine our elections. I mean, there's nothing new here. The fact that they were able to hack our elections, in different ways, and propaganda and misinformation and disinformation, it is definitely a threat to our country. The whole dark web. I mean, every time we make a technological advance or a medical advance or whatever, our morality is not mature enough to handle it, and we are constantly trying to handle the ethics of the new inventions.
Right, I agree with what has been said, and I like the idea of some international coordination. I remembered in the back of my mind that Europe had already had some attacks like this, so I looked it up. And just last year, there were about 100 attacks, of which half involved ransomware. So they are certainly talking amongst themselves in the European Union about some things they could do. One of the things that strikes me about this, and I like Gaylia's point about, having to kind of grow up, to learn about how to handle new things. But also there's another very human principle here, which is once you break trust, it's so hard to regain it. Russia and Ukraine have been at each other, and the pipeline has been used in acts of hostility between those two countries. But then, Russia turns around and it wants everyone to trust its pipeline. It wants to enter into those markets and have its work trusted. A regime, an international regime like the one we're starting to fantasize about, has to be built on some degree of trust. You have to be willing to share information and share some protocols for enforcement. And every time some nation cultivates this sort of problem by training people and encouraging them to learn how to do these attacks and deploying them against somebody, they're undermining even the prospect of building that trust.
And that trust is going to be continued to be attacked in time, because the persons who are wielding this power stays 2, if not 10 steps ahead of those who are trying to catch up with them. We have in our country massive organizations, intelligent minds who are trying to do the best that they can to shore up infrastructure, technological infrastructure. And yet, because of the fast changing nature of the malware and ransomware that's being used, it is just very hard and difficult to keep up with it. But fight we must. It's a job that we just cannot stop. And my prayer goes for those that are working diligently to make our systems much more safe than they are. It is not safe. It is not, we don't have a lot of confidence and trust in a lot of internet technology, but it is what we have. And so we can't stop and freeze the work that we need to do. It needs to go on knowing that that's the field that we're playing in right now.
I would like to, if everybody's comfortable, ask our wonderful moderator, John Blim. I noticed you have your new Crusade for Children pin on, and I wondered if you could tell us how far away we are from Crusade weekend and what any plans are related to the pandemic and things like that.
I probably could do that. Why not? Yes, the 68th annual Crusade is just a few weeks away, June 5th and 6th. So panel, we've got about a minute and a half left. Who'd like to encourage people to give? And what would you say to someone who's on the fence about giving to the Crusade? Who'd like to start with that? You've got about a minute and a half.
Our computers work. Give to the Crusade.
Playing off the last topic. Right. I got that. Yeah.
People are being helped. Give to the Crusade.
Mm-hmm.
I would encourage everyone. We had a tough year this past year, as you know, all of us did. And obviously our total collection was down about $700,000 this past year. And that means $700,000 worth of monies that didn't go to a lot of agencies that are hurting right now. So we just need, as a bounce back year, I think we need to try to do the best we can ever do. And all of us need to give a little bit more to help all of these agencies.
Marian, go ahead. Go ahead and have.
Well, I was just going to say, if there were ever a time to affirm the power of community to uphold life, this is the time. What a hopeful sign for us and our future if we can pull together and make sure that children get a good start in life.
Very good panel. Thank you to Dr. Marian Taylor, Rabbi Stan Miles, Rabbi Gaylia Rooks, Reverend Dr. Kilen Gray, and Father Joe Graffis.
Seems like a cliche. People have been saying it about the pandemic. We're all in this together. Well, the Crusade is something that we've all been in together for many, many years.
And these amazing machines that saved her life, I just remember seeing WHAS Crusade for Children.
For those of you who contribute to the Crusade, just want to personally say thank you. It's helped so many families just like mine. We wouldn't be here without you.
The 68th annual WHAS Crusade for Children is right around the corner, June 5th and 6th. Please help out. More than 200 agencies are supported by your generosity to the Crusade. You can find out more at whascrusade.org. You can also text to donate. The word Crusade, text that word to 50155. Text Crusade to 50155. Learn more at whascrusade.org on how you can help change a child's life.